You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Sebastian Meyer is an award-winning photographer and filmmaker and a recipient of multiple grants from the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. His editorial photographs have been published in Time Magazine, Fortune Magazine, the Sunday Times Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times, among others. Meyer has made films for National Geographic, PBS NewsHour, Channel 4 News, CNN, and HBO. He also produces photo and video content for NGOs and charities such as UNICEF, UNFPA, and Mercy Corps. In 2009, Meyer co-founded Metrography, the first Iraqi photo agency. And his first book, Under Every Yard of Sky, is published by Red Hook Editions and can be purchased from his website. And we're going to be talking about the book and a lot of his amazing work in the next half hour. So, Sebastian, welcome to our show.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's great having you here. John, I'm going to let you kick in. You got a list of questions here.
well, let's just kind of step back a little bit to ask you how you got into photojournalism and what first brought you to Iraq. I know you mentioned that one of your first gigs was in England. I'm assuming you studied here in the States, or?
Yeah, actually, I didn't study photojournalism. I decided to become a French major in college. I had an amateur interest in photography when I was in college. And when I was studying in France, I met an American photographer who had a darkroom there. And I used it to just develop my black and white film. And she looked at it and she's like, have you ever heard of photojournalism? I was like, nope, no idea. What is, obviously I knew what a newspaper was. I knew what photographs were, but I didn't know that photojournalism was a thing or was a job or they were just pictures. And it didn't occur to me that somebody took them. So she gave me the Magnum degree book. And I was like, oh.
Really?
Yeah.
It
was the light bulb over the head in the cartoon version of my life.
And you were 19, 20?
I was 20 years old.
Okay.
And it was just like, oh, right. I need to do this. And it was like, it sounds almost cliche to make it that cut and dry, but it was that cut and dry. So then I graduated and moved back into my parents' apartment in New York, got an internship at Magnum, and started assisting photographers around New York. At the time, the New York Sun was a sort of up-and-coming, resurging newspaper kind of thing. Yeah. And so I got to shoot for them.
Oh, wow.
Wow. I shot their real estate section because I was 22 years old and had no experience.
Well, how'd you get the internship at Magnum with
I literally just called them and was like,
I just heard of photojournalism. And
I hear you guys do photojournalism.
I Googled photojournalism.
And it was you and those ice cream bars, so you must be the journalism people.
I was going to go for the champagne, but it's too expensive. So I had an internship. And again, look, I understand. I even understood at the time. I was from New York. I could live in New York for free. And so I had an internship 3 days a week, had a job the rest of the week. It's very hard, almost impossible for anyone to afford to do that. So I knew that I was in a very, very lucky position to do that. And then as I said, I got work at the New York Sun. And then after about 6 months of that, I moved to England, which was, was a lifestyle choice, as you'd call it. I was dating an English girl. My mom's English, so I had an English passport, so I didn't have to worry about any sort of visa working issues. And I moved to Manchester in the north of England and started freelancing for their town newspaper, a city newspaper. And it was, baptism by fire. The difference between British and American newspaper journalism is very striking. American, outside of the Daily News and the Post, we have these grandiose ideas of the fourth estate and we are ethical and we're gonna hold truth to power and hold their feet to the fire and all that stuff. And in Britain, it's like journalism and newspaper reporting is really about entertainment, and you got to do it shocking. You got to do it fast, even for regular non-tabloid journalism. And so I had this tiny little car, little Nissan Micra. I was on the wrong side of the road half the time. There was no GPS or anything like that. So I had like my little A to Z on my lap, flipping pages, again, driving on the wrong side of the road. I was teaching myself standard transmission. I was a disaster. And I would like run from job to job to job.
I like to hear the stories of the older photographers there.
It's a good thing texting wasn't out then.
I'm texting. I had a flip phone which had whatever it was before 3G, and I would take I go to an assignment, local, quick, fast-paced, fast-moving local news assignments. Take a couple pictures, edit on the laptop in my car, and then as I was driving to the next job, it would take so long to upload that it would 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour as I would drive, hopefully on the correct side of the road this time. It would take that long to upload the 2 or 3 pictures that needed to make it to the paper because it was an afternoon evening paper. Right. So things had to move.
What were you covering? I mean, what was some of the stories?
Everything. Yeah. Everything from
grocery store opening to
a couple had their dog as their best man, and so I had there's a maid of honor, so they dressed the dog up in a maid of honor outfit and went for a walk, and I shot that. That made national news, believe it or not. No, seriously, that was
walking the maid of honor before the wedding. That must have been impressive.
I think the title was "Walkies Down the Aisle." That was the name of the article. I did a story about the fact that the trains were delayed because there were wet leaves on the train tracks, and the title of that article was "Unbelievable."
But I mean, other than good stories, a lot of this will lead you to where you go.
Absolutely.
But a simple point is that, how do you visualize, how do you, show that story? Trains on the tracks, leaves on the tracks is not the most exciting thing, but you got to find a way to show it, right?
Absolutely. It was a great challenge, and there were great photographers who had, and I'm not saying this for, to be unnecessarily humble or even try to be funny, but these guys as local photographers are way more talented at sort of graphic description than I'll ever be, right? Faced with an assignment like leaves on the tracks or whatever, these guys had imagination for, it's not quite photojournalism, it's more descriptive. But for example, one of my favorite stories was this guy, Mark, he was amazing. He had to do a photograph of it was an event coming to town, a kung fu event, and you get a bunch of guys to do a bunch of kung fu moves, and then you just slow the shutter down so it blurs nicely. Like, how do you do it? So he took him out to the iconic square in Manchester where there are a lot of pigeons. He got the guy to get in a crouch, put breadcrumbs all around him so all the pigeons were all over him, and then the guy jumped out of his position into a kung fu stance, and all the pigeons went up.
Right.
Wow.
There you go.
I totally lack that ability to do that. And Mark would do that every day.
I think I know what the difference is, okay? This is in Manchester, okay? I think before they go out on assignment, they stop at the pub.
That's it.
That's where you get your creative input, okay? And after that, let's try it.
Absolutely.
Great music. A lot of great music came out of Manchester too.
Sure. A lot. And I mean, then that was, I covered a lot of music events.
Soccer.
Football, a lot of really random mini football riots.
Yeah.
Like one guy versus a horse.
Yeah.
And that had to do with a pub.
Somehow I can imagine. Yeah. But also, your work seems to, lend itself to the sequencing and the longer aspect as opposed to that one visual grab, and they're both skills, needless to say, both talents. So jump us forward then to, I'm sure there's a lot of steps in between, but fast forward to Iraq and when you arrived and what was going on there.
Sure. So to make the quick link, so I'm doing all this newspaper work in Manchester, but the beginning of the story was I was given this Magnum photo book. So my dream had always been to do big international stories, to cover things that were not broken windows, cats stuck up in trees, that kind of thing. So after Manchester, I moved to London and was doing similar work, but for the national newspapers. The Wires, I was doing some freelancing for Getty Images. And then I got this assignment in 2008 in Iraqi Kurdistan. I had met a guy whose father was a documentary filmmaker who'd been covering the Kurds since the 70s. And he was working on a big multimedia project about the Kurds, their history, and in particular Anfal, which was the 1988 genocide that Saddam committed against the Kurds. So he was making a documentary, but wanted stills to go along with both the documentary and the online multimedia project. So that was my first assignment. So I got there and I'd done my research. I'd read about the Kurds of Iraq, what had happened. So I had research, but research can also be preconceived ideas. And I was asked to photograph something very specific, which was the survivors of this genocide, which I did. But I was I was only there for 6 weeks. I had another 2 weeks on at the end. But just from a journalistic and a photographic perspective, I just bitten off way more than I could chew. There was way more going on. I had this idea that, the Kurds were victims and Saddam was the perpetrator. And that's totally true. But I didn't know that in the 90s, the Kurds fought a civil war amongst themselves. So they were also perpetrators. I didn't know. There was so much about Kurdistan I didn't know until I got there. And I didn't know when I got there either. It just raised tons of questions.
The cultural dynamics of that part of the world are really complex because most of these countries were formed by people who were never even there.
You're absolutely
or
right.
had no idea of the dynamics of the relationships between the cultures that had been there for thousands of years.
Absolutely. The fact that the Kurds are even part of Iraq is just after the First World War, Britain and France more or less just divided up that part of the world out of the crumbling Ottoman Empire.
Probably in a pub they did it also.
Most likely. And look, funnily, the Russians, everyone talks about Sykes-Picot, but the Russians were part of it, but it was 1917. So like literally the Russian,
They had their own problems.
Well, that's what happened. He was just like, give me part. Oh, you know what, guys? Hold on. I got to go home. We got this Bolshevik revolution going on. Hold on. I'll be back. Never came back.
Hold my place. Hold my spot.
Yeah. And the Brits said, hold my beer, watch this. And they took this Kurdish region because they colonially ran Baghdad and Basra, and they just stuck the Kurds on top and said, we're calling this Iraq. We don't have a leader, so we're going to take the brother of the Jordanian king, and he's now king of Iraq. And that's it. And that was Gertrude Bell, British archaeologist / spy, who just made this, again, like as you said, colonially just drew a line in the sand and said, this is Iraq. And the rest is not history. The rest is
one thing I want
events.
to ask you, don't lose your thought.
Mm-hmm.
Up to that point, you've been doing things that are relatively safe. Let's face it, leaves, kittens, things that, and yeah, I'm sure there were a couple of times when it got a little bit dicey. It could have been rough, like you photographed soccer riots and people die in those things. But now you go into a place where it's a whole different reality. How much trepidation? Were you what kind of hesitance did you have when you were given this assignment? Did it hit you say, this is what I've been wanting to do? Oh, shh.
I wish the answer were that I had trepidation. I had the idiotic, I was going to call it machismo, but I'm just not a macho guy. But like, I just had like the idiocy of an arrogant white guy who just wants to go off and do crazy adventures. I was the opposite. I should have been more trepidatious, but I wasn't. Now, the flip side of that is the Kurdish region of Iraq was very safe. Right. I started to push the limits very early on and go into unsafe areas in like literally in my spare time. Like I'd, do the assignment and then I'd have a day or two off.
In that original trip?
In that original trip.
Okay.
So you had a safe home base.
I had a very safe home base. And the Kurds, because of in the recent history and the relationship to America, is like they're very, very welcoming to Americans, to Europeans, to journalists. Journalists played a really big part in telling the world about what happened in 1988 and telling the Kurdish story. So they have a very, very a lot of respect and a lot of time for journalists. It was on that assignment in the fall of 2008 that I met Kamran, who was an Iraqi Kurdish photojournalist. The guy who I was working for had a Kurdish friend who had been his translator way back in the day, and he was training up this young, very talented, ambitious Kurdish photojournalist. And he said, well, look, if you got this American guy going out and taking pictures, wasn't my young guy come join him? And Kamran and I met, and it was just like instantaneous. It was like your first day of school, and you sit down at lunch, and you're like, oh, we're best friends.
Right.
And we shared like 2 words in common, but we both had laptops with photographs on them. And like, what does 2 people who love photography need? You just need photographs. And so...
And we'll follow up on this, obviously, because he's an important part of the book, and there's a story to go with that. So so you met him then, and I'm assuming the assignment went okay. Your curiosity grew. You went into areas that were outside of the assignment. I guess take it from there.
Yeah. So that assignment ended in basically November, December 2008. And I went back to London where I was living, and I was like, oh, that's right. Financial crisis. Financial crisis hits newspapers. Newspapers are failing. Who gets cut first from a failing newspaper? Photographers. So I called all my photo editors looking for work, and they're like, Sebastian who? Right? I mean, I was freelance when I left. And so as the totem pole of freelancers, if you haven't been calling in for work every day, you just go slide down the pole. So we're now in January of 2009. Financial crisis is now full swing. And I was like, oh, this is not good. And Kamran called me. I mean, we stayed in touch, and he was like, look, I'm running this local newspaper here in Kurdistan. It's a fortnightly newspaper or fortnightly magazine. And I have to source all these photographs of Iraq for the newspaper magazine. But I'm struggling to find images. I'm thinking of starting an agency of like a library of Iraq images. I was like, okay, tell me more. He's like, that's all I've got. I was like, why don't we make a photo agency for Iraqi photographers? And he's like, yeah, let's do it. That's a great idea. And it was really his idea. And it started off as a library. We thought about doing stock images, and then slowly, well, actually not that slowly, very, very quickly we realized, no, let's make it an agency where we train Iraqi photojournalists to work at the best, because they had all this natural talent. But up until 2003, it had been a dictatorship. There was no history of journalism or photojournalism. So there was a lot of time that we had to make up. So I moved there in basically the summer of 2009. Kamran had already rented an office. We had a pleather couch, an office desk, a hot plate, and a spigot coming out of a wall, and that was it.
That's pretty much what we have.
B&H.
So to say, this studio.
Did you
looks
have a
very
bathroom? Because we don't.
Yeah.
No,
we had.
Well, what about internet, and what was your communication system at that point?
So at that time, there were 2 hotels in the city, Sulaymaniyah, which again is maybe a city no one's ever heard of, but it's a city of, at this point, almost 1.5 million people. It's a sizable city for Iraq. The second largest city in the Kurdish region. Erbil's the capital. But there were 2 hotels that had Wi-Fi available. And so what we do is we would edit in the office and then walk or take a cab and go to and then upload from there. We eventually got internet in the office, but it was slow. Electricity cuts. You were looking at maybe 4 to 8 hours of government electricity, which means it just comes on the grid, and then you maybe get another 4 hours of local generator, which you can't
if you pay for it.
If you pay for it, and that is, that's, you can't really rely on that, and you can't run anything more than a laptop charger. Like the moment you turn on a fan or an air conditioner, you don't have amps or anything. You're done. So I mean, that was it. I mean, we were like a Silicon Valley startup without the capacity. Without the silicon and without the capacity for massive economic growth. There was no venture capital coming our way.
Do you remember the first photo you sold?
That's a great question.
I
don't.
I remember first steps
I remember, I think the first story that we sold was a story about Kurdish smugglers on the Iran-Iraq border. Kamran and I went to do the story together.
Well, you guys you guys are running the agency, but you were the 2 photographers of the agency at this point?
Right. Exactly. And it was complicated for me because the whole point, so on that first trip, when I met Kamran, he introduced me to his Kurdish Iraqi photojournalist friends. And it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, again, like a light bulb moment. Oh, fuck. these guys are taking, and not guys, these men and women are taking incredible pictures of Iraq that I'm not seeing. Everything I'd seen from Iraq since 2003 had been taken by American, European, South African, Japanese photographers. I'd barely seen anything from Iraqi photojournalists outside of wire pictures. The AP, Reuters, AFP had great Iraqi photographers, but it was all breaking news. There was no in-depth magazine-style photography being done by Iraqi photographers, almost none. And so this nuanced image of Iraq, the story of Iraq wasn't being told by Iraqis. And I saw these images that these guys and men and women were taking. I was like, oh, right, we got to do something about this. So when we started the agency, it was complicated for me to include my images in the agency's pictures because I'm an American. So we're presenting ourselves as an Iraqi photo agency, but I'm an American. So really my role was to be the agent, the translator between Iraq and the American and European newspapers and magazines. Not to say that I every once in a while I would put my pictures in there if I had gotten access to something that the agency would benefit from. But in that case, the credit would only read Metrography. I wouldn't put my name attached to it.
And did you get any specific blowback from people as you were the face or one of the faces of this agency and saying we want to do an Iraqi agency and here I am talking about it?
Right. No, thankfully not. I think what I got was actually the opposite, which was, you try to you do your PR and your marketing. And so I would approach. At that time, it's really funny that they don't exist anymore. There was a ton of photo blogs about a decade ago, and they just don't exist anymore. New York Times Lens blog. There was, Vice had a blog. NPR. I mean, they still sort of exist, but they were super popular back then. NPR had one. So I contacted all of them and said, "You guys want to do a blog post about this Iraqi photo agency?" And they're like, "Absolutely." And more often than not all of them, but more often than not, I was put up front and center as like, in the white savior category, which I really didn't want. But in Kamran and I talked about this. I was like, look, you go up front and you do it. And he's like, look, if your name and your Americanness is what is going to get the agency recognition, that's the most important thing. Later on, as his English got better and better and better, I pushed him to be up front and center. He was also like devastatingly charismatic. So in person, he always was like the band's front man.
The guy.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And not that we need to timeline this, but you're getting it up and running, and you're getting a crew of photographers around you that are shooting, and you're developing stories with them. You're editing. You're talking about how to go long form, or
all of it.
All of it.
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes we'd have to take everything that you just said, and sometimes we'd have to take uncomfortable back steps, which would be, you're taking great pictures. You understand, no one understands sequencing really, but like you understand a long form concept. It's more than a single image. You understand how to develop a story, but you don't actually know how your camera works. Like your camera's stuck on automatic. So let's teach you how to use your camera, which is always a very uncomfortable step to do with somebody who thinks they know.
Sure.
Who says they're a photographer. So those are always delicate conversations to have. But that's exactly what we were doing. Also doing conversations that are still existing in all photojournalism today, which is ethics, right? There were people who were setting up shots that we had to, photographers did it at the Manchester Evening News, that story I told about the pigeons. When is that acceptable? When is that unacceptable? What are we driving at? How much Photoshop can you do? These conversations were just never being had in Iraq because it was journalism, and photojournalism was such a new concept. And then the other thing too, which was always very uncomfortable, but had to be addressed all the time, was money. We understand in photojournalism community here that you go shoot a story on spec sometimes, and you may or may not get paid for it. Telling Iraqi photographers, you go shoot a story and you may or may not get paid that's not how things work there. So sometimes we knew we were onto a good story, but the guy or lady wouldn't wouldn't shoot it unless they got paid. So we just front the money from the agency to pay for it, and then we'd sell it afterwards. Sometimes we would, sometimes we wouldn't. I have certainly not walked away from this agency a richer man.
Yeah.
That's really how it should be anyway.
Says you.
Yeah, exactly.
You go start an agency in Iraq.
As a photographer.
Yeah, but for example, in that situation where a photographer wants to step away from the story because they don't feel they're being compensated or it's not worth their time because they got another job and they're doing, is there ever the conversation of, hey, this is a story that I know is going to get some traction. Let's send somebody else in there to do it. Or was it like, you know what, we want to respect this person's vision and their proprietary hold on this?
That never came up, mainly because it was early enough that people were doing the stories that sort of they were the only ones that were able to do. We didn't have people who were so good at that point where I'd be like, all right, look, you might have found that story, but you're lazy and you're garbage, so I'm sending in somebody else.
Yeah, that's not happening.
And also, I mean, I know as a photographer, if any editor did that to me, like they better live in another city.
And also, what about the idea of having to get one or two almost breaking news or great one-off images to make a big sale or to get the name of the agency out there? Were you looking for that shot too?
We were for a very short, in terms of breaking news, we tried that for like a hot second. And then we realized that we cannot compete with the wires. The wires are set up to do that. The wires have the money to do that. And there's no need, in terms of the market, Iraq didn't need more wire agencies working. In terms of what we needed to do is we needed to get deeper access to great stories that no one else was thinking of and developing them as stories. Like, for example, our photographer Ali met this soldier, Hussein, who had lost his leg, an Iraqi soldier who'd lost his leg in a bomb in Fallujah. And he just stayed with Hussein. And Hussein was getting very little money from the military in terms of compensation, not even enough to get a prosthetic leg. And so Ali started to tell the story, and we published elements of it. It made it into the Iraqi media. People donated money. He got a leg, prosthetic leg. He then was able to get married because his would-be father-in-law said, without a leg, you can't marry my daughter. Had a family, had kids. And so Ali tracked this whole story. And then at the end, we had this great long, great big story. And that we were able to sell that as a really powerful story.
And you were saying you sold them to Iraqi media. Were most of the publishers in local or in Iraqi media? Or
we thought at some point that would work, but the finances of it didn't work. They paid so little per image that the agency couldn't take a cut because the photographer would end up with virtually zero. Right. And so as an agency, spending money to get stuff into local papers that we wouldn't be able to capitalize on wasn't worth our time. And the understanding of copyright law and just ripping stuff off the internet and sticking it in your newspaper, it was just
that's a whole other story.
It's a whole. We would have liked to have had a much better interaction and relationship with the Iraqi newspapers, but it just it doesn't work, unfortunately.
What about the idea of a free press? I don't know what the press is like in Iraq, the local press anyway. But how much government censorship is there?
It's not so much government censorship as although that exists, is that every political party has their own paper. And so that's what you have. And so it becomes everything is a tribal, clan, political party division. There are a couple independent media outlets, but those are then owned by businessmen who have their own
with somebody.
Exactly.
Everyone's got an agenda.
Right. American media 100 years ago was the same thing.
And maybe returning to
maybe going back there.
Yeah. So at this point, we are in about what year? Just when we can roll out after that. We're talking about you're up and running.
We're up and running, and really when things start to change, like we get that PR bump, like those photo blogs come out, and things really start to change. Is 2012. 2012 is like we get invited to the Tbilisi Photo Festival, which is a big photo festival in Georgia, the country. We are now going to Perpignan, the photojournalism festival in France. We're getting visas for our photographers to travel outside of Iraq. We are a known quantity. Our photographers are getting known. The editors of Time magazine know us. We have pictures published in Der Spiegel, Washington Post, Times of London.
Right.
Like
and
things
you're living there full time, working day in, day out as your job at the agency, and shooting at the same time.
Shooting at the same time, because certainly I didn't the agency made just enough money to pay rent and pay bills.
Right.
Neither Kamran nor I made any. In fact, we lost money. We put money into it because it was an amazing project. So I had to support myself through photojournalism and commercial work
Assignments.
that was out there
Outside of the agency.
outside of the agency.
But all the time living there.
All the
Not-
time
not
living
tra-
there.
I mean,
Yeah.
maybe certain traveling, but not.
And I also, in terms of my own work, as a photojournalist, there's only so much work I could get inside of Kurdistan and even inside Iraq. I was traveling around Iraq proper, going to Baghdad and Fallujah and Mosul and different places. But in 2011, I went to Libya and covered the civil war there in 2000, for 2-3 months in 2011. Went to Romania to shoot video for National Geographic. I went to Ukraine. I was, doing assignments around the world.
Taking assignments.
Afghanistan.
Right.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. We come back, more with Sebastian Meyer, and we're going to start talking about his book, Under Every Yard of Sky. Stay tuned.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. The best way to support the show is by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For links to gear and more information on today's guests, check out the show notes in your podcast app or visit our homepage on the B&H Explorer website and join the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. And now, back to the show.
All right, we are back. Before we start talking about your book and a bunch of other things here, one question I did have is that you had this thing in your head where you got into photography, and being a photojournalist was a goal. Okay, you see Magnum books and you're working with Magnum and everything else, and then you actually get to go to one of these places that is on the other side of the planet. How different, or what was the biggest surprise to you as far as your perceptions and your realities? What was the most jolting thing to you?
The most jolting thing to me was how unjolting it was, in the sense that I had this idea of looking at all this photojournalism from Magnum,
Right.
And National Geographic stuff and Time Magazine stuff, that the world of out there, whatever there was crazy and different and full of headscarves and headdresses and war and poverty and all this stuff. And I got to Kurdistan in 2008, and the market was full of knockoff iPhones, and there were malls, and there were just pizzerias, not very good pizza, but
It's like around here, actually.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. You're describing Herald Square. Okay.
But in all honesty, I think that was the biggest shock, and I can start talking about how I got interested in doing this book. The idea came out within the first year or two that I was working in Kurdistan, was the fact that I had this idea of, I'd done my research. The Kurds were victims of a genocide. There was tribalism. There was 95% of Kurdish villages were destroyed. So there's this mass rural exodus to cities that was forced migration. And I got there, and all of that history was true. A lot of the problems were still ongoing, but they were still building highways, and they were still building apartment buildings, and there were English language schools, and life goes on. And it's not, the world is not as different as what I realized after a little bit of time of doing, war reporting or conflict reporting, was that an unintended byproduct, an unintended consequence of war photography, for lack of a better expression, is war photography paints a portrait of victims and perpetrators, and very little, if anything, in between. And so when I got to Kurdistan, I was like, all right, here are the victims. Who are the perpetrators? And I was like, there are traffic jams and people with, medical problems, and people who are just not very nice people.
Yeah, but right? and Kurdish jerks and Kurdish nice guys, right?
Yeah, it's it's just like walking around anywhere in the world. And I think of one of the things that photography and photojournalism in the past has had a tendency to do is to highlight our differences. What looks odd and different and weird? And in fact, what I wanted to do with this book was to paint what I think as a more realistic picture. And you'll find in the book, some extreme things. There's some extreme elements of war, which we don't see in America. We, blood and suicide bomb attacks and stuff like that. But there's also supermarket shelves and guys on cell phones and, immigrant labor. I mean, what, right? I thought Iraq and Kurds, they're victims, they're poor. Well, actually, the Kurds, by the time I got there in 2008, there was so much wealth that was being accumulated that Bangladeshi, Ethiopian, Nepali, Indian migrant workers were being shipped in to do the work that the Kurds could afford not to do anymore.
Yeah.
And migrant labor is an American issue, I thought. But no, it's a world issue.
So you're getting over there and you're having this realization of, is not what you expected. And is the photos that you take and ultimately the book that you make a product of you learning this and realizing that, wait, this is not what is going on. It's not journalism. And what kind of process was that for you to kind of embrace the idea of doing this and shying away from the photojournalistic aspect of it?
I mean, so to be clear, before we sat down and press record, you'd asked me about the relationship between photojournalism, documentary photography. What's the difference? And do you do one or the other? Do you separate? For me, defining terms is complicated because I don't know how to do it. But if you think of for clarity, photojournalism, let's just say it's what I do for newspapers and magazines, and documentary photography is what this book is. For me, I hold both in my hands, right? Like I've got to do something that makes money, and this book is a labor of love. It's not a labor of financial brilliance. And photojournalism might not be the best way to make money, but it is a way to make money, right? And so and the approach that I take as a photojournalist is much more specific. You really nail down a very specific topic, a very specific story, and you go very deep, on a very narrow issue. And then this book is the opposite. I go very deep, but on a much wider issue. And I can hold both, if you will, both at the same time.
That's my question, exactly. Can you do both at the same time?
Sure.
And were you doing both at the same time? Let's say you're on assignment and you see a shot over here that speaks to the documentary aspect. You're able to do both, put this one aside and get to it later.
Absolutely.
When you're publishing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember this was years ago, like 2007. I was covering I think it was the prime minister or the parliamentary elections in Pakistan after Benazir Bhutto was killed. And I was there, and there was a British photographer, a good friend of mine, Justin, who was there, and I was just like sort of torn because I was like, holy shit, I'm in Pakistan. There's like color and it's just alive. But I was really, really focused, and my editors really wanted stuff just election focused. Mm-hmm. And Justin said, you've got the pictures you take for the paper, and then you've got your pictures. Mm-hmm. And he told me that a year before I even went to Kurdistan in the first place. And that has stuck with me for the last, 15 years, which is, even when you're on assignment, you can see things that are super important. Mm-hmm. You might not even know what you're going to do with them further down the road, but you've got to remain, even when you're on assignment, like open to all possibilities, even if your editor just doesn't want to see it.
Sure. And what about though your mindset and your ability to focus on, does it tear you away, or do you think it even helps?
That's a good question. I think
the context anyway.
Certainly when you've got the fear of your editor hanging over you always, if you have to choose between getting a shot that is interesting versus the shot that your editor wants, you always go for what your editor wants because it's what you're paid to be there for. Mm-hmm. But there's usually enough time in any assignment to get plenty of stuff that you're interested in just on your own.
And how do you relate with other photojournalists that might be not at all interested in the documentary side or just kind of, they drop in for coverage and then are back out a week later? Did you, I'm sure some are good and some are jerks and all that other stuff, but did you ultimately, especially after working and starting an agency, tend to get frustrated or impatient?
I think, no, not really. If the real honest answer is there's so little work for photojournalists that if somebody parachutes in and does an assignment, I'm just jealous of their assignment.
Or you cover them as the assignment.
For example, a lot of photographers came in after 2014 to cover the war with ISIS. At that time, and we're going to get to this story, I had stopped working because I was consumed with another much more serious issue. And at the very first stages, because I'd spent so many years working as a photojournalist, my instinct was always to do photojournalism. And I was caught up in a kidnap crisis, hostage crisis that I needed to focus on entirely. So when I saw my friends and colleagues coming in to do assignments, I was a little bit envious. I was like, I would rather not be dealing with an ISIS hostage crisis. I'd rather be working. But no real actual hard feelings. There are photographers who are young and naive, because I was young and naive, who parachute in, or don't even parachute, just come in thinking that they're going to, tell the story. And they have that two-dimensional view that I had when I started. Maybe 5 years ago, I would have been more judgmental, maybe a little bit in my head, meaner to them. But I'm a little bit older now, and I know that they're young, or certainly not in age in terms of mindset, and they're going to grow out of that. And everybody does eventually.
So before we get into what we really want to talk about, and this is great, don't get me wrong, but about the book and the story that you're hinting at here, let me just throw out a couple of gear questions. And I know it's
it's totally
left field here, but what were you shooting with? And specifically, talk a little bit about the environment that you're shooting at, keeping cameras up and running. If you're, you need new gear, you have a breakdown, how'd you handle that? And anything specifically regarding that? Because also, we haven't talked about it much, but you do motion work too, and video. So
I started in 2008. So I come out of a really fast-paced newspaper environment. So I had this is going to make me sound dated, but I'm an old man now, so it's okay. I shot with a Nikon D2X, which was one of those big, I don't even know what they're called, but it was a DSLR that had the built-in side grip. So I could just
just had one on the table here, D6, the latest one today.
Gotcha. That was an APS-H sensor. It was
I think so.
One third. Yeah.
Exactly. So garbage in low light. And I had two of them, and I had one sort of wide angle zoom, and then I had one telephoto zoom, whatever,
tools of the trade,
like 14
and it wasn't even real wide angle.
No, I mean with a 1/3 frame, everything was. But anyway, so that's what I went on my first assignment with, and also the color palette of Nikon back then was really like muddy and warm, and I just
I think I had 7 colors. I think
it was
about 7 or 8 colors.
It was just not, and I was it was at that moment that the first Canon 5D had come out, and everybody in the industry had the 5D, and everyone also had that really sexy 35 millimeter 1.4 lens. And I was like, oh, everyone's pictures are beautiful and the colors are amazing. And my color just, it's garbage. And of course it's not the tools, it's the tradesmen, but I blamed it on the tools. So I sold my gear and got a 5D.
Okay, which ultimately maybe led to some video work and...
Well, that's exactly what. So I had a 5D, the first generation, which didn't have video. Right. So I had that for about a year, and then I got a Mark II, and then everyone went DSLR nuts. Right. Yeah. And I started, and I was like, look, I guess I make video now. Not knowing anything about frame rate, not knowing anything about...
Nobody did back then.
Yeah. I would hate to look at the footage again. It would be skin-crawlingly bad.
Right, but, flash forward, you made some incredibly great video pieces too along the way.
So, yes, thanks to some very talented editors. So then that was the transition. I mean, in pure gear form, it was Nikon. And when people ask me now, because when you are a professional photographer, amateurs always ask you, what do you recommend? I'm so out of, and I apologize to all B&H listeners because I am not a gearhead. All of my colleagues are shooting with all this amazing new equipment. Sony's now amazing, and I'm still just on another generation of the Canon 5D. And in fact, just got back from a big assignment for Fortune magazine and was still shooting video with a 5D Mark III. And it's great. I mean, the quality is amazing. But yeah, that's what I shoot with. In terms of what was great about the change, every new iteration of Canon was that certainly on the photography side, batteries last forever. So I don't need, electricity cuts are constant or were constant when I was living there. Unless I was shooting video, I was fine in terms of batteries. I was fine in terms of, card. You just get a big, CF card and you're fine. Right. That was never an issue. I'm also fastidious in keeping all of my equipment clean. Like my laptop is 10 years old and looks brand new just because I'm a neurotic cleaner of laptops.
But over there, on assignment and in field and dirt and dust and rain and everything, keeping everything clean and working. What about transmitting images? What were you using back then? And
that's a great question because that has changed. I mean, it's changed so much in the first 5 years I was there, and then in the next 5 years after that. So when I got there, really, if you needed to upload anything from the Kurdistan region, which was, again, safer and therefore more developed than the rest of Iraq for the most part, you could just use Wi-Fi in a hotel, would be fine. But if you were doing news and you need to move quickly, then you needed a BGAN. You needed to upload, which are expensive to buy, expensive to use. As a freelancer, just was not, we weren't able to do it. We eventually, once we got known, we got sponsored by Thuraya for a year. We're their big satellite data company. Okay. So so they gave us that. They gave us a BGAN and sponsored us for a year, which is great. But by the time
all the product of hustle and work and getting these things too, right?
Precisely. So anyway, so that's how we were uploading stuff. But we weren't doing a ton of news, so we were okay to just be there at 3:00 in the morning in a hotel lobby, the 900th cup of tea that day, just like working away.
All right.
And then now, obviously, with cell phones, it's a totally different story.
Right. And I'll just throw this in before we kind of dive in deeper into the story of the book. That your work is not just isolated to Kurdistan or the conflict zones of the world. I mean, you've done some really great work recently in the States, and the series on Coshocton, Ohio, after the election, and other related work. So take a look at the website, and let's not pigeonhole anybody, So anyway, but let's get back to the agency, and Cameron and your relationship with him, the story that you're going to share us with, and the book, which is kind of the narrative of that photographically and with text.
Sure. So I think we left off in 2012, right? Things were on the up and up. Yeah. I mean, everything was going great. The agency was doing amazingly. We were getting published in all these American and European, even Japanese media. We get invited to photo festivals. We're going to photojournalism, events where we're meeting editors and becoming good friends with them, not just on an email basis. Same 2013, and then 2014, ISIS sort of mushrooms up. They've been in Syria, they crossed the border into Iraq, but also come up organically in Iraq.
How aware of this growth were you as someone living there? Or
it's so embarrassing. Yeah. You would think that I'd be like, oh yeah, I knew and I told everybody, and no one would listen to me. No, I was as surprised as everybody. Yeah. It was when ISIS took Mosul on June 10th, 2014. It was just like, what's going on? What the fuck? Right. I mean, I had covered Syria at that point, so I knew I was good friends with an Iraqi cameraman who was kidnapped and executed in Syria, so I was aware of that level of violence that ISIS. But ISIS was a Syrian thing. Again, I knew that they had started in Iraq. It was called ISI, the Islamic State of Iraq, and I'd known of them since 2010. But I hadn't realized what had been going on under the surface the whole time. Okay. I did not have a finger on the pulse of that. Right. So June 10th, 2014, ISIS takes Mosul. I jump in the car with a friend of mine, Eunice, who's one of the metrography photographers, and we just drove to Mosul that day. No, the day after, the 11th. It was unbelievable. You could just do that. Back then, the Peshmerga, the Kurdish military, still controlled the road to Mosul. So we drove to the outskirts, and we were pushing really hard to get inside the city because we didn't, at that time, we thought we could, as journalists, we could control the situation. And the Peshmerga, like, you guys are definitely not going inside the city. Right. But we pushed. And that day I did, called in to the BBC I was doing all these breaking news phone calls. And then the 11th. And so I was doing my own reporting. Kamran was so I was in the western part of the Iraqi Kurdish region, so Erbil to Mosul, and Kamran was in the eastern part. And he was running the agency, and we were sort of in touch, and I had, at that point, the agency was doing so well that I had stepped back from the daily running of it. Kamran's English was great, and he was able to just navigate the agency really well without me. So June 11th, I go and I do another story. June 12th, I actually see Kamran that morning. We all hang out, have a good laugh, and then we go off and do our own thing. And then that afternoon of June 12th, I get a phone call coming back from shooting a story. I'm just heading home to file that Kamran's been killed. And I was like, what the fuck? Right? And it's one of those things that's super shocking. And when you hear something like that is so shocking and so drastic, you just assume that they got it wrong, right? Like rumors happen really, really fast, especially with cell phones and smartphones now. So it's like, oh, somebody just got it wrong, and it's just spreading like wildfire because people are on edge because of ISIS, and just every bit of news just goes crazy now. So I was like, I don't believe that. So I start calling around, and Eunice starts calling around, and it's like we're understanding it's actually true. And I just seen him that morning, so I was like, fuck, you got like. The most dangerous thing in any country in car accidents. Even in a war, car accidents are way more dangerous than anything. So I just assumed Kamran has been in a horrible car accident, and it was just awful. But actually, as I found out, because I didn't know, he had gone back to the agency to just run operations from there. And on the way back, the head of the Peshmerga ministry called him and said, look, we're doing a counteroffensive against ISIS just south of the city of Kirkuk. Do you want to come cover it? And, Kamran was a manager of the agency at that point, but he's got photojournalism in his blood.
Right?
He's not going to,
He had a story.
So he went and did that. And while he was on the front lines covering, he got shot in the neck, and he died. So I obviously didn't file I just called my editor, so I can't file this. My friend just got killed. And so I headed straight back to Suleimania, which is about like a 3-hour drive from where I was. I got there at night, and the courtyard of the agency was just full of, friends, family, everyone was there, and, crying. It was awful. So I met with his brother, his older brothers were there, his younger brother was there, and we said, okay, tomorrow, first thing, daybreak, we'll drive to Kirkuk and figure out how to get his body off the battlefield. Because the Kurds had actually been pushed back from their position. So it was a no man's land that ISIS had actually sort of won. So it was going to be complicated. But we knew that through tribal relations, we could get his body back. And so daybreak, we drive to Kirkuk. We're standing around, and we're just calling the local police officers who will just help figure out how to get there. And it's June in Iraq. Gets hot at like 7 a.m., like sweaty hot. And then out of nowhere, Birwa, who's Kamran's best friend from childhood, his phone rings, and it's Kamran. He'd been shot in the neck, but he hadn't died. The Kurdish Peshmerga, the commander, had thought he died because there was so much blood, and he'd left him on the battlefield because they were coming under such heavy attack from ISIS. They had to beat this crazy, hasty retreat. And Kamran had been left there, and ISIS had gone on to the battlefield, seen that he was still alive, and had taken him prisoner. So he was calling from his captors' phones. So it was just like this moment where, you're in total shock that your friend's dead or your brother's dead, and then all of a sudden they come back to life. Again, we didn't get into this, but Kamran was such a terribly charismatic person that the idea that he could talk his way out of death was
right.
It was kind of like, if there's one person
quite sure what is going on.
Right. If there's one person who could cheat death and come back to life, it was him, and which he did. But then as soon as that relief, that incredible joy of, holy shit, he's not dead. This is amazing. It's amazing, amazing. You just suddenly realize, oh no, but he's an ISIS captive. And at that point, we know what happened to Jim Foley. I had as I said, a friend of mine who was a cameraman who'd been executed by ISIS. Like ISIS, being an ISIS hostage was very, very scary, very dangerous. But so we drove immediately to the commander of the Kurdish forces and said, look, Kamran's alive. He said, no, he's not. We said, the Birwa, he had an app on his phone that recorded the phone calls. So we actually had a recording of Kamran's voice and of the kidnappers themselves. They'd taken the phone. So he's like, oh, right. So he gets on the phone with them, and they start to try to do a hostage negotiation. But this guy has been a Peshmerga Kurdish fighter for his entire life. He doesn't quite have the subtlety needed for hostage negotiation. And it was, it went really bad really, really quickly. And they just end up yelling at each other and threatening each other and, hanging up the phone and calling back and threatening. And it was just, that was it. So we just drove straight back to the
Also
office.
indicating that this person they weren't aware who he was necessarily, or
They knew he was a journalist.
okay.
And they knew he was Kurdish, but that didn't necessarily.
But when the commander is calling and screaming for his freedom, they realize they have somebody that is a little more worthwhile.
Right. And so we had to be super careful at that point because Kamran was he was a known photographer in the West that we had to do an immediate media blackout, right? Because so at that point, AFP had announced his death. Time magazine or Time.com ran a story about his death already. And we're like, oh shit, if the American media is publishing his name, ISIS was incredibly competent and very fast moving on the internet. One Google, Kamran's known as a photographer outside of Iraq, right? Like maybe he's worth something more. So we had to do this very aggressive media blackout, which took way longer than it should have. But we got that on lockdown, and then we started, working for his release.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sorry to jump back. And the blackout is just a matter of making phone calls to editors and saying, "Hey, we have this situation. We don't know what's going on. He's a journalist. Let's keep this story out."
Yeah, and it was complicated because Time ran this story about him. Iraqi photojournalist Kamran Najm killed, and blah blah blah. And so we're like, all right, delete it. And the guy who wrote the article said, I'm not the editor. I can't delete it. So I go to his editor. He's like, I'm not going to delete it because I'm not responsible. It goes up and up. And this is taking like minutes, which feel like days, to be honest. Mm-hmm. And then it went all the way up from him as the writer, all the way up to basically the VP of Time at that point. And they were saying, it's unethical for us to delete an article. Like, we'll run a correction that he's not dead, that he's kidnapped. And I was like, you guys are missing the fucking point. Right. Any mention of him is putting his life in danger. And they're like, well, I'm sorry, journalistic ethics. And I was like, I'm going to stick those journalistic ethics where the sun don't shine. Yeah. It took them something like 3 days to take the article down. No joke. And I fast forward, Kamran is still missing since 2014. And after 2017, we presume that he died in the early days of captivity. But I cannot tell you for sure that article in Time wasn't somehow responsible for what happened to him. Yeah. I don't know.
You can't prove it, but it could very well be.
I can't rule it out.
But there were, after that immediate back and forth, there was almost no communication. There was no idea what was going on with him. And So what you want to do in a hostage situation is you need to get proof of life. So we had proof of life from the phone call, but then we, like, okay, so where is he? Where's he being held and all that kind of stuff we need. And then obviously you need to get in contact with the captors to see what they want.
What do they want? Yeah. And unlike let's say a Somali pirate situation where they're going to kidnap you, they want money. That's what they want. Yeah. ISIS, maybe they want to kill you in a really extravagant way, videotape it and use it for propaganda. Maybe they're just going to hold on to you in total silence and use you as a bargaining chip 10 months, 10 years down the line. You don't know. So what we were trying to do immediately was to get back in touch with the captors. But that phone number that they'd call from, phone was off and never turned back on again. So how do you get to them? And so we started working every single angle. Because Kamran was such this sort of big personality, he knew lots of people and lots of very powerful people. So we were able to contact members of the Iraqi elite, some of them who've been in the Saddam government, who are now living in exile in Jordan, in Beirut, and people who were Baathists back in the day, probably had ties to ISIS. We were able to back channel to them. We used his family through a whole, complex system of tribal law to backtrack, to back channel to ISIS themselves. We were never, ever, ever able to contact a jailer, a captor, anyone who took responsibility, and we never got another proof of life. But this went on. I mean, I'm really condensing time here.
How long was it?
So, I mean, it's still theoretically still going on.
You don't know that he's actually dead for sure, do you?
No.
Okay.
No. He's presumed dead. I mean, again, in terms of intensity, June 12th, he shot. Yeah. June 13th, the morning, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning is when we find out he's alive. And then all of June, we're having 18, 22-hour days, just and so everyone had, there was a small group of us working and everyone had this different role. My role as an American, I couldn't show my face. Me associating with Kamran was really dangerous for him. Mm-hmm. So I was the silent center. So I was the center and the note taker, right? Mm-hmm. Any intel came to me and was logged. So I have this crazy spreadsheet and log of everything. Then his family, his brothers had their specific roles. And then he had journalist friends with these amazing contacts in ISIS-held territory. So we were working those. We had contacts in the Kurdish Secret Service who were working those angles. Right.
So if anybody had, an opportunity to find him and talk to him,
right.
the resources and the people were available.
Right.
And it just wasn't happening.
It wasn't happening. And there's a whole second story, which is in any situation like any hostage situation, which is so stressful, it is very hard, near impossible to keep everybody working together. And relationship broke down very, very quickly. His family felt that they should be in control of everything, but they didn't have the wherewithal or the contacts that his journalist friends or his government friends had. Right. And it was just it's a whole mess.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. And a friend.
Yeah.
To say, a great friend. Yeah.
So that's the story. And so in terms of the book, I decided to have the book be the story of modern Iraqi Kurdistan, but inside of it is this essay, which is printed on different paper and styled differently, which is a standalone essay of the story of what happened, of my friendship to Kamran and what happened to him.
And in terms of the design and the make of the book, was that always part of it? Was that always an idea to insert this in the middle and have it done? The images are in black and white. There's text in 2 languages. Was that there at the beginning of the idea of the book?
Well, the beginning of the idea of the book started in about 2009, 2010. I gone to Kurdistan with that 2-dimensional idea, right? Victims, perpetrators, right? That's as simple as that. And I was like, oh wait, no, there's way more going on here. I'm going to start to work on a book. So I was working on the book in 2014 when ISIS showed up. And then I stopped working all of 2014. I couldn't work. I was working 18, 20 hours a day trying to get Kamran released, trying to find Kamran. And then in 2015, after a year, 12 months of not working, I needed to make money. I need to go back to work. So I started go back to work as a photojournalist, but also started to go back to work on the book at the same time. And
but taking images at that point, or
taking
just
images, So the images, I took images all the way up through 2017, so 15, 16, 17. But my approach and my understanding and my concept of the book actually changed because I'd done this. Kurdistan is not just this area of war; it's an area of love and family and prosperity and all these other women's rights issues and all these other things. And then I returned to working in Kurdistan, and now I had been directly affected by war in a way that was incredibly personal, non-journalistic. And I also, Kurdistan had changed. Kurdistan was at war. People were dying. People's fathers were being killed. People's brothers were being killed and being kidnapped. And so my perspective of Kurdistan changed. So the book changed. When it came to answer your question, it's a long answer to your question, but when it came time to designing the book, I knew from the get-go when I was physically putting the book together that the writing would not be interspersed with the photography. I have seen a couple of books that are able to intersperse the photography and the writing together really, really well. My friend Ben Brody did a book with the same publisher, and it's brilliant the way he weaves the words and photographs together. But more often than not, I find that the words distract from the pictures, right? Like I'm going through a photo book picture. I'm in picture mode, right? I'm feeling the layering, I'm feeling the sequencing, and then there's like but then there's like a poem thrown in, and I'm like, or there's like a mini essay.
Right. Or a caption even. Or that's not
like a long caption that I'm like, and then I'm out. So I was like, when you look at my book, you have the option of sitting down and reading the essay and then looking at the pictures, or vice versa. But you can do one or the other.
Right.
And the story of Kamaran is thematically layered into the story of Kurdistan. So they do interweave thematically.
Right. And physically, and I'm certainly, I imagine emotionally at the core, and the rest wrapped around his story. Right?
Totally.
I mean, and another thing I'm thinking as I'm looking at this incredible image of a man on a hillside with flowers, thinking, well, I want to know the story of this image, but at the same time, maybe that's not what you want to do. It's not about this individual image and the story of this guy. It's about, the sequencing and the whole piece, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, like it's hard when in terms of a photojournalism photo book there is a story behind each picture.
Right.
How did I get there? Who is that guy? But these pictures, do become, emotional representative moments. Like, I mean, I could tell you the story of who that guy is and how I know him and how I ended up on that hillside with the marigolds. But it would take too much time. It would be too distracting to tell each story of each picture in that depth.
The part versus the whole, Yeah. And there's just, I mean, this is, I don't, not to oversimplify, but just the pure documentary nature of some of the book, with some incredibly beautiful images mixed in. Beautiful. I mean, this one here, the old man and the girl on the swing.
There's a simplicity to a lot of them in the composition.
And the real life is just... and now there's also several photos like this where you're a photo of another photo.
Right.
And there is some information. In this case, it's Cameron, right? So
no, that's actually... So what there is in the interlace throughout this story throughout the book, are 4 photographs with information of where they were born and where they died, of 4 men. And this is a family that I met in 2016, and the family of 8 or 9 brothers, 4 of whom were either killed or disappeared during Kurdish wars. So the first brother, Safin, died in 1987 fighting Saddam. The second brother, Hashim, he was kidnapped and disappeared in 1996 during the Kurdish Civil War, and then the 2 other brothers were killed fighting ISIS. Wow. So I tell their story in the introduction, and then their photographs and that story is like a secondary narrative, visual narrative that sort of goes throughout the rest of the book. Okay. So that's what those photographs are.
Great. Following from there, I'd like to ask a little bit about just the production itself of the book.
Totally. So the process of making a photo book is it differs from person to person. I did my book with Red Hook Editions, and the reason I went with them is that they have a very hands-on approach to the editing process. But they have a very hands-off approach to everything else. So it's up to you to, how you print it, what designer you work with. You have to raise the money to publish it, but then you get every book. So in the financial side, which is, it's not the most interesting, but it's very important, is I don't lose money on this book. I think a lot of people who produce photography books, they do it because they love it and they accept that they're going to lose thousands of dollars because this is what I don't have to. And I haven't, which is great. But I met with Red Hook and they accepted me. I met Jason and he's become a good friend now. And the process was, he's like, bring us, the publishers. It was him, Alan Chin, Pete Van Eckmel, Glenna Gordon, and a couple other invitees. We made an arrangement to sit down at their offices, and I brought a stack of 500, 600 images, and they just went around the table and they just initialed the pictures that stood out to them as an initial edit. We went from 500 to 200. And it was one of those things where as a photographer, you become really attached to your images, especially something if you've been working on it for 10 years. Also, I've been working as a photojournalist, so a lot of the pictures were great magazine images. And they're like, yeah, this is great. This is a great magazine image, but it's obvious. It's too pretty. It's too catchy. It's not, your tone is off.
Are you able to call these shots on your own, or do you depend on an editor to do this? Because not every photographer could be this.
I can't. Yeah. In my honest opinion, I don't think there are any photojournalists or documentary photographers who can properly edit their own images. I'm sure there are many people who will listen to this and be like, "You're wrong." I can't. I have looked at my friends'
our
work.
listeners.
I've worked with my friend, watched my friends try to edit their work. They always pick the wrong images.
Interesting.
Because we have our stories attached to them, and that's
Absolutely.
the whole thing.
You ever seen
got to divorce yourself.
Have you ever seen
a
director's cut of a movie?
Yeah.
It's garbage.
Yeah.
It's garbage. You're like, oh, that sequence or that shot has to be in there. Why? Because it cost $1 million to make, or I loved it. Well, it doesn't work with the whole rest of the movie. So, that's
well,
why
actually, the one editor's cut that did work was Blazing Saddles, Mel Brooks, because they said I heard him speak, that because if the studio had their way, the movie would have been 6.5 minutes long. And he said, no, I'm putting all that stuff in. So, no, I disagreed on that one point.
Okay, well, Mel Brooks gets a pass every time.
All right. So the book got made with some help from them and also some very talented photographers as well.
Super,
yeah.
And also sequencing. Like, again, Pete Van Ekmel's he's a brilliant photographer. He's a brilliant sequencer, and he's made amazing books. And I really, he was able to look at the pictures up on the magnetic board, and he saw patterns and movement that,
it's a composition. It's not there. It's not any different than putting together an LP, a group of songs or anything like that. It has to have a rhythm and a pace to it.
Absolutely.
And not everybody has the ability to see that rhythm and set that pace and phrasing.
Yep.
That's what it's about.
Yeah. And then you have to translate that. So you have all your sequences. Okay. So the images work, the nice sequence in a row, but now you've got to put it in a book. Now, is every picture, double page spread, full bleed? Which go small, which go big,
which play off each other,
and then as you turn the page, different relationships happen, and then there's the thing which you just have to work with as a photojournalist. I try my best not to stick everything in the center of my frame, but most things end up right in the center of my frame. So you can't do double page full bleed on everything because you lose everything in the gutter. So then things have to move left to right, and that.
You always have to keep an inch of dead space.
But was a book for the work that you were doing outside of the photojournalism while you're there? Was a book the ultimate goal in the back of your head somewhere?
Yeah. I knew that Kurdistan, this region that I had lived in and grown to love, felt like home, that it needed the time and the space. Because one of the things that's really important to me is humor, right? I love to laugh. I love jokes. The Kurds and Iraqis in general, but because I learned a bit of Kurdish, like the Kurds are hilarious. They've got a really, really good sense of humor. And I realized that I needed to bring that to the book. If you go through this book, you'll see a lot of pain, you'll see a lot of suffering, but you're also going to see a lot of things that are funny. And I knew sort of instinctually, it's like, if I can get a viewer, a reader to slow down enough to laugh, to get the humor, then the painful bits will be even more
absorbable.
Thank you. Yeah.
Digestible.
More poignant.
Yeah,
right?
Thank you. Yeah, there you go.
It'll be more poignant because you'll
I get it.
It'll be more human.
More of a contrast.
Yeah, exactly. And like, if somebody tells you a joke and you laugh, then you're on a human level that levels the playing field, that we're not so different after all. And so if you're at the not so different after all, when something bad happens to somebody, then it's like you feel it, right? Like, awful things are happening in Syria and Yemen right now. But if you can just be like, that's what happens to Syrians. That's what happens to Yemenis. But if you realize they're not Syrian and Yemeni, they're just like me, my neighbor, my whatever, then it hurts. It's more poignant, and then we're better connected. And I think I can do a better job connecting us through laughter than I can through pain.
We can't encourage anybody more of our listeners to take a look at this book. This is a real incredible piece. And I guess what I asked before about whether a book or an exhibition or other ways of showing the photo, it was always a book.
It was always a book. Yeah. I have an exhibition opening at Davidson College in North Carolina at the end of the month of about 15 images of the work. Again, because there are 73 color images in it, plus the black and white from the essay in the middle, that's way too much for an exhibition. Right. So for the entirety, it was always going to be a book. The other thing too that's important to me is that the book is entirely in Kurdish and in English. And so I printed hundreds of extra copies of the book so it could I could obviously have a lot of books I had to give away to friends in Kurdistan, but that I could do a massive discounted price for people in Kurdistan.
Right.
And it's thankfully it sold out in Kurdistan immediately. And I've had to sell,
selling it but yourself or through your
there's a
personal
bookstore.
network.
There's a bookstore there that,
wonderful.
and actually the owner of the bookstore did the translation into Kurdish,
That's
which was awesome.
One final question that I would have, that this book is out and it's very graphic and it's a powerful, powerful book in a lot of different levels. Has this book jeopardized your position in any way? I mean, has it raised your profile to a point where now all of a sudden your head is sticking up above the crowd? Do you have to be more careful now?
That's a good question. Thankfully, it hasn't at all, actually. It is that, no, I mean, I when I was working and living in Kurdistan, I was very much a known quantity there as an American guy. So whatever risks were there for me the risks were higher when I lived there.
Okay.
In terms of my profile, no, I don't think so. I mean, there are a couple. Whenever you are an outsider and you do a book about another culture, another place, you have to be very, very careful about representation. I've done a lot of events in London, in DC, in New York, and Kurdish friends and people I don't know who are Kurdish have come to the events, and I'm always very, very. I'll be honest. I'm nervous when I present this work in front of them because I'm an outsider. I'm the white guy.
It's your flavor of it. It's your vision of it.
Well, respect is key.
Respect is super key.
Yeah.
I have had nothing but, I've had nothing but warmth and acceptance and thanks actually from the Kurdish people who've bought the book and have come to the events. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that I lived there for so long. And I think the other thing that comes through is I think I got it. I don't want to pat myself on the back. I'm sure there's some people who don't like it, who don't like the representation. They're complicated issues. There are, for example, I'll give you an issue that has had minuscule amount of controversy is that there are photographs of Christians in the book. And Christians in Iraq are not ethnic Kurds. They're a different ethnicity. This book is about Kurdistan, about the region, and have been a couple people, Christian Iraqis, who said, that's wrong, we're not Kurds. Now, I never said they were Kurds, but I said the region that they were living or practicing or whatever, like the picture of the family.
They're within the district. They're part of they're there.
But they would say that that's not correct. And so in an area of such highly defined ethnic groups and such deep and historical mixing, you're guaranteed to upset somebody. But that level of controversy, thankfully, I think I have done a good enough job where it's been very, very small. But it's complicated, and I appreciate that there's no way to get it right entirely.
No, that's
a good point.
Very good point. You'll never satisfy everybody.
No.
You can't.
And if you do, then you probably didn't do it right, to be honest.
Like you were saying before,
Yes.
right? You got to piss off somebody, right? What's up with Metography right now, the agency, and what's your next project? How do we end with those?
Sure. Yeah. So after Kamran was kidnapped, his younger brother Ahmed took over the agency, and it's not running anymore as a photo agency that has photographers going out and taking pictures. It's become more of an advocacy for photojournalism in Iraq, which needs that. So Ahmed did something which is remarkable. It's something that we'd always wanted to do, that Kamran and I had always wanted to do together, which was to bring the World Press Photo Exhibition to Iraq.
Great.
An exhibition that has been full of pictures of Iraq, but never presented to the Iraqi population. So last year, Ahmed was able to have the exhibition in Baghdad, Erbil, and Sulaymaniyah, and he's going to do it again this year. And I think he's going to try to take it to Mosul, which would be amazing.
That's a coup. Yeah, sure. Literally.
So that's sort of what Metrography is saying. It's an advocacy group, and it has a great name and recognition. So Ahmed's done a great job.
And a library of images still that are
exactly.
And that website is?
It's metrography.org.
Okay.
But really what their focus right now is sort of inside of Iraq, bringing photojournalism and ethics and copyright and all that kind of stuff, like working within Iraq to really up the game.
Right.
Personally, I just got back from Malaysia for a big assignment for Fortune on plastics recycling. So that's the kind of I'm just doing magazine work right, not just.
Yeah.
I'm doing magazine work right now. This book came out 5 months ago. I had a kid 10 months ago, which is thanks. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And in terms of a big artistic project, I'm just
TBD.
a little bit, TBD. I'm a little bit drained right now. I can do my photojournalism work just fine.
Good for you, man.
But the next big book thing, TBD.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as life cycles go, one chapter closes and you'll get the other one going. And in the meantime, it sounds like you're doing some pretty interesting stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Sebastian, it's fantastic talking to you today. The work you've done is amazing. The book is a truly wonderful book, and we urge anybody listening to this to check it out.
Under Every Yard of Sky.
Yep. And where can people see your work? Websites? Where can they go?
So you can see the work at my website, which is sebmeyer.com. You can get the book on Amazon, but if you want to get it like about $10 cheaper, you can go to my website. The only difference is that you get free shipping, and I can't, for whatever reason, with the Amazon thing, I can't give free shipping there. So, but yeah.
Okay. All right. And just for the old timers, is it available in any bookstores around the city or other cities?
You can get it at the Strand.
At the Strand.
Okay. And the Strand has been I've sold tons of copies through the Strand.
Great.
So I love the Strand. If you are a New Yorker, go support your local bookstore.
12th Street and Broadway.
Yeah. And now soon to be on the Upper West Side.
Really?
My old stomping ground.
Oh, yeah.
A store? Not just a little kiosk they used to have?
Yeah,
they used to have a kiosk in Central Park?
They're taking over the bookstore on Columbus Avenue in the 80s.
Okay. That sounds good. Okay.
Cool beans. And the name of the book is Under Every Yard of Sky by Sebastian Meyer. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much. This has been awesome.
Thanks so much.
Cool beans. My name is Alan Weitz, and on behalf of Jason and John, bye-bye.